Good morning. My name is Siraj Ali Mohammed. I'm a consultant with Thorogood, and I'm here to present the first in three-part series around telling stories with data. As I've been doing my research in preparation for this session, I realized that we've been telling stories for many, many years, and you probably saw the slide that Liz sort of flicked onto. And that probably dates back to the caveman age, when people were telling stories, drawing on the cave walls, trying to say how they were going about with their hunting, what are the sort of beasts that they came across, and all that sort of messages that they wanted to convey, the stories that they wanted to tell people. But more relevant for our session today, I wanted to focus on the visual representation of statistical data. And I'll start with this line graph dating back to 1644 by a Flemish astronomer who was looking to convey the message around the differences in longitudes, the difference in longitude between two cities, Toledo in Spain and Rome. And rather than presenting a table of data, he chose to draw that on a line graph. And I think the message is clear. He had about estimates from 12 astronomers who went in and did their calculations and came up with the differences. And the variation in those 12 values was significant, and that came out in that line graph. From then on, I think that we have seen many different kinds of visualizations, people using bar charts, heat maps, pie charts, or even sort of pictorials and pictograms to tell a story with data. In my opinion, the golden age of statistical graphics probably came about in the 1850s. And a gentleman called John Snow, this is not the John Snow of Channel 4, by the way, who does the political analysis, dates back to 1854. John Snow was an epidemiologist, and he was intrigued by the cholera outbreak that grasped London during that time. And he had a theory. He had a theory that cholera was not spread by air, as people were expecting or knew it to be. He had a theory that it was spreading through water. And again, he had been telling many people about the theory. It hadn't been getting the same level of response back from people. What he did was he took a map of London and plotted the number of deaths caused by cholera on the map of London. So he drew a bar chart for every household where he had the sort of deaths caused due to cholera. And on that, as you can see right in the center, there is a bar chart that's really high. And then onto that same map, he overlaid information around water pumps, so locations of water pumps in that area. And I don't know if it's very visible from where you are, but there is a water pump right in the corner near the bar chart that has got the maximum height. And he conveyed the message to the city's leaders to say, we need to start looking at what the water pump is. Is the cholera outbreak being caused by that water pump? Led to further investigations, and it turned out that there was a sewage-related issue with that water pump, and it was infected. They got it changed and put the whole cholera outbreak to control. Again, John Snow was telling a story, and he was telling a story visually, which made that impact to the city's leaders at the time. We'll move on from there to the age where visualizations, interactive visualizations and computer graphical packages have grown so advanced. Hans Rossling is a Swedish medical doctor by profession. He's an academic, and he's a passionate statistician. He's also the co-founder for a non-profit organization called Gapminder. Gapminder helps the UN sort of help move its development plans by the use of statistics. So things like comparing health versus wealth, things like life expectancy, child mortality, etc., and plotting that against income by person, GDP, comparing it across different countries and how that moved over time. For those of you who haven't seen Hans Rosling's presentation before, BBC ran a couple of documentaries a couple of years ago, actually, and if you haven't seen it, you must watch it. He is really passionate about the data. He talks through, the key thing is there is an animate button, as you can see on the graphic there. He clicks play and then runs around the visualizations to talk through his message around what is causing that impact on health, and is there any correlation with any of the other factors that he had identified at the time. But people have been telling stories for many, many years. And I think we all tell stories in our own roles as well. It's not just, we are not talking about cholera outbreaks or health versus wealth and that sort of correlation. And what the efforts of people like you and me have been doing is pushing the BI tools to come up with a new capability or address that new requirement, and that capability of storytelling. Traditionally, all BI tools have been very powerful when it comes to reporting, analysis, visualizations, you might argue. The storytelling aspect is a new area where all the vendors are really focused on developing their products with. So today's session, we're going to split it into 3 parts, and as Trevor mentioned earlier this morning, I'm going to look through what vendors like Microsoft, Qlik, and Tableau have been doing in this space. In order to do that, I thought it'd be good for us to have a quick framework on what are the components that you really need for the art of storytelling. Last year, I had been to a session held by Guardian, and some of the things that we came out with there was there are 4 main components for any storytelling, any story that you're trying to say. The first, obviously, is data. So you've got to do your data exploration side. So you've got to seek interesting patterns within data, do the analysis, and identify the trends. Visualization tools today are so advanced that you might choose to do some of that analysis using the visualization tools, something like Liz or Andrew showed earlier. Once you've identified the patterns, you then might tweak the visualizations again to make sure that the emphasis on your data or on the trend is evident by changing the visualizations. And then you go about identifying the story. Now remember, there could be many stories held within the same data set. And you're looking for the story that resonates with your audience. So you don't want to be talking different stories to different people. So remember, it's always about identifying the story that resonates with your audience. And there is that final aspect of design. When I refer to design, I'm talking about things like what chart, what colors do I use, fonts, labels, etc. So there is that aspect of design of making it look good. Now, using that framework, the first session that we're looking at today is on Microsoft. So using that framework, I'm just going to look at the different tools that Microsoft offers that helps us with telling a story. There are many tools that we have listed down there. They're all intuitive within their own right, as in Excel, PowerPoint, Power Query, etc. But there is an aspect of getting them to all hang together seamlessly. And I think that's one area where, as Trevor mentioned at the start of the session today, that we've been working with customers to help with the tool integration and make sure that they all sort of interact seamlessly with one another. Going back to the framework, for the data part of things, I'm going to use Excel, Power Pivot, and Power Query. We all know Excel. We all live with Excel. Power Pivot's an add-in added to Excel about 20 in the 2010 version. 2013 has seen Power Query. Power Query allows you to search for data both internal to your organization as well as external to your organization. And once you have found the data, you use Power Pivot to model all the data that you've collected. Could be on Excel, could be on the Power Query window that came back through with results. You model it all into Power Pivot. So that top layer of tools there allow you to do the data and that first couple of those 2 components of art of storytelling. Power View is an add-in to Excel, which allows you to create interactive visualizations. So we'll come back and look at how that helps us with it. And Power Map is a tool that allows us to look at data geospatially. So we'll see how that works as well. And PowerPoint, I think, is a thread that hangs all of these together. So we've all been using PowerPoint to tell stories in our own organizations. We'll see how we use that to tell interactive stories using tools that Microsoft provides today. So I'm going to go into my demo, and I'll cover 3 key areas on my demo. We're going to look at geospatial animations with Power Maps. I'm going to look at interactive visualizations with Power View, and also talk about how do we do storytelling PowerPoint. There are 3 sessions, and we are conscious that there are 3 sessions. So we wanted a topic that sort of connects all 3 sessions and helps you as the audience to take back some of the learnings that you have from our sessions today. And so we've chosen to focus on oil. Why have we chosen to focus on oil? Because it has been an energy, we have been living in an energy-dependent world for many decades now. The price of oil dictates many of the things in our day-to-day lives. And more significantly, since last June last year, we've seen a decrease in the oil price, and everyone's been talking about it. It's been so topical, and I thought that's an area which is going to be relevant to many of you in the audience today, if not all of us. So we've collected some data from BP's website. So we've got some BP statistical data around oil production, which we will look at. In order to give us a timeline for all the demos, I'm going to use the period from 1965 till about 1985 for my first demo when I do the Microsoft bit. And when we come back after the break, when we look at the other tools, we'll start on from 1985 onwards. So this is a storytelling session, yeah? So I want you all to imagine that you're now working for BP, and you've been tasked with identifying or putting together a presentation that helps convey the petrochemical landscape in the era 1965 to 1985. This is where I really need the music. Okay, I'm going to jump in. So where do we start? I think the first area is always around analyzing the data and finding out patterns that would help us with the visualizations. So I've got the data all in my Excel file. I'm not going to focus on the Power Pivot and the data modeling aspect of things. So I've got all my data there. I've loaded up into a Power Pivot model. First off, I'm going to show you the Power Map visualization. So if I've got Power Map installed on my Excel, and within the Insert ribbon there, I have an option to insert a map. So I'm going to go in, click on that, and say Launch Power Map. That shows me a window. And as you can see, it gives you a clue as to what sort of an application Power Map is. It is asking me, do you want to open an existing tour, or do you want to create a new tour on its own? So I'm going to go and create a new tour so that I can show you how a tour is created. It's shown me a map, and it is plotting dots for all the locations where it has data, and it has prompted to see, I can see that you have got a country field on your data source. It's assuming that is a geographical link with the data that I have. You've got it right, so I'm going to click on Next. The next layer is asking me what is the actual data that you want to plot on that visualization. And I'm going to choose production. So if I just scroll down and I see production. So it's given me a legend. I can resize the legend. By the way, I can rename the legend, etc. I'm not going to do that in the interest of time. Let's move it away. I've got bar charts drawn on each of the countries depicting the production levels in those countries at the time. I'd like to understand where we are looking at to start off with. So I'm going to turn the map labels on so that we can see a few countries being labeled. And I'd like to focus on Middle East, because I think that's where all the oil production is all about. And my gut instinct tells me that's got to have a story. I'm going to zoom in a bit so that I can understand, look at the particular countries that I'm interested in. And I'd also like to add perspective so that you can see how tall each of those bars are. So that's my first scene. So I'm focusing on that particular region. And again, I can now go on and create my next scene. So I'll add another scene. And for this one, I'll turn the orientation and now look at US. I can see the production for United States. What I can do from here is sort of carry on and add annotations. So this could be saying production. I can ask it to bring it through a field and say I want you to bring production sum so that it shows the value there. I can add a text box to give me United States. This is the comments around it for lack of creativity with that. And I can have that title just added up onto the top of the chart as well. Again, interest of time, I'm not going to put you through all the trouble when I do that. I'm going to move on to a tour which I already have created. So if I close that tour, I haven't saved it, but Excel will have saved it for me. I'm going to open a world oil prices tour. And what I'll do is I'll quickly play the tour for you. So I'm going back and saying it's 1965, and according to BP statistics, there are about 20 countries producing more than 150 barrels per year in that period. I'm then focusing on United States. Notice how it's done the transition for us. I'm talking about the production levels within the United States and sort of saying where was the first oil being discovered and who are the key players there. I then focus on Venezuela, who's the second largest producer of oil, producing almost 1/3 of the United States at the time. And again, I'm talking about adding more commentary to say that this is what is happening there. Move on to Kuwait, who is the third largest producer. You get the hang of this. I am talking through an author-driven story. There is no voice to it, but I can go back and add that. You can export the video out of this, and this is an author-driven story where I'm saying this is how I think the petrochemical landscape has been in that era. I can call on things like the oil embargo in 1973, relate that back to wars. I can add my own commentary. I'm going to escape the tour because it's great when you're doing an author-driven story, but I'm not a great fan of author-driven stories. I like it when I give my users the ability to have more interactivity with the data, with the reports that we create. So for this part of the session, I'm going to jump into PowerView, and caveat here, I'm looking across different versions, to be honest. So I'm looking on a web version of PowerView. Let me just quickly minimize that, bring up the... So I've got this Power Pivot gallery, so I've uploaded the data that I've collected within Power Pivot, and I've uploaded it onto my online cloud site. And if I click on the first visualization here, so that is the chart which is bringing up all the PowerView reports that I've already created. I've got a blank report in there, and that's on purpose, so don't worry, it's not lost connection yet. And what this is, for those of you who have already seen PowerView, this is the web version of PowerView. So I can go back and look at the tables that I have to hand. I'm within a browser, by the way. I can look at all the data points that I have for analysis. I can go in and say select time. And PowerView is going to give me a table of data with all the time data points that it has got for. And I'm looking at world oil price. So I'd like to select world oil price. Again, PowerView recommends looking at it from a table perspective, but I'd like it to change to a line chart. It's almost like doing this on PowerPoint, to be honest. So I can drag and drop that visualization to fill the screen. I can also add filters. So if I go onto the filter page and look at the view, I can add that as a filter in terms of bringing the year filter there, because I promised my colleague Alan that I wouldn't look at anything beyond 1985. So I'm going to take it back to 1985. And that's the data we have to hand, 1982. Once I have looked at the data, I can now start doing my research around, does it correlate with any other world events? Is there anything that we should be looking for? And clearly there are two increase in prices, marked increase in prices. One around 1973, 74, another one around 1979. What I have done as a background is I've gone back to save you all the trouble of doing this while on stage. I've gone back and looked at all the history behind that. What I can say here is if I go back and click on the chart, I can go back and add things like text box and say investigate this increase in price. And I can drag and drop those text boxes onto the chart, and it looks like I'm annotating the chart itself. From within PowerView on the web, at this point, once I've created my charts that I want, and as you can see, I've done a few of them working through the history of oil production, etc., I can go in and say, file, export that to PowerPoint. So it'll prompt me to say, do you want to save all your changes? I'm going to save my changes, and while it does that, it's going to export it back onto PowerPoint for me. So if I say export is complete. I'm going to look at the desktop and save that as a demo. On my desktop, if I double-click and open the demo file, you can see that I've got 4 visualizations that's been created with PowerView all set up there for me. What I've then done is I've gone in and taken and copied those visualizations onto my presentation here so that we are within the presentation, back onto the presentation that we started off with when we started off the demo. So now I'd like to talk through my findings in terms of the petrochemical landscape between 1965 to 1985. I'm talking about, I've got some commentary around oil production where was oil found first. I've included a chart to show the different regions where oil production's been, show the production levels in different countries at the time. I'm also listing down more commentary around the United States and OPEC right at the bottom. But on the corner right there, you can see there is a button called Interact. So if I click on that, what PowerPoint will now do is obviously to prompt me with credentials. Once I've given that, it is going and contacting the PowerView reports that I have hosted up online. And it will allow me to interact with the data. So if I hover over US and get more details like tooltips, that becomes more functional. Moving on to the next slide. So that I've laid out the history of oil price there. I'm looking at the world oil price trend. Again, I've given out the reasons why those two 73 and 74 peaks have been. The first one relating to Yom Kippur War, when Egypt and Syria went against Israel, and then US. For those of you who've been following Planet Oil series on BBC in the last 3 weeks, there's been great inspiration for many of the content that I've got here. The Yom Kippur War and the Iranian Revolution in 1979 have all influenced the world oil price at the time. So I'm adding in commentary around it, giving more details around what the world oil price looks like. And the third chart includes even more interactions. Again, allows us to understand that interactivity level in a bit more detail. So I've got a world oil price chart, trend chart right at the top there. I've also included a production versus consumption sort of bubble chart. So the bottom axis there is all production. I've got consumption on the y-axis, and the size of the bubble is production as well. Again, just to emphasize the fact that these are countries producing large volumes of oil. So if I click play, so this is it's taking me through time from 1965 through to 1980, and it is telling me how the different countries have moved during that period. Probably moved very quickly, so you didn't probably spot some of those trends that we were talking about. So I'm going to drag it back to the 1973. So let's take it from start. And you can see US predominantly the largest producer of oil. As we go through time, as we get to 1973, 74, you can see Iran and Saudi Arabia right at the bottom there, sort of increasing in their production levels. And as we get to the Iranian Revolution, Iran right back. So watch out that Iran bubble for me. As we get through to the 1979, it drops right back in terms of productions, goes right across. Very impactful, I think, in terms of telling stories, and kind of relates back to the Gapminder story that I was talking about with Hans Rossling earlier on. So that was my demo. Just to recap, we looked at creating geospatial animations with Power Maps. We looked at creating interactive visualizations using PowerView, and we also looked at storytelling with PowerPoint. And now your presentation is ready to go back into your BP colleagues. Yeah, snap, and you're out, and you're back with me. Later on during the day, we're going to look through a couple of tools more. So we'll look at a couple of vendors, Qlik and Tableau, and we'll see how they are promoting the whole storytelling session. So head down for coffee, and we will usher you back in when we're ready. Thank you very much.